Nobody at Clearwater Animal Shelter expected what happened the day Tegan Moss walked through those doors with a trembling golden puppy in her arms. The staff had seen plenty of rescue cases, but this one was different. The puppy, barely 8 weeks old, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, just shook constantly like she was waiting for something terrible to happen again. Tegan had found her 3 days earlier, abandoned in a cardboard box behind a gas station on Route 47. No collar, no microchip. Just matted fur and eyes that had seen too much too soon. The vet cleared her physically, but emotionally, that puppy was shattered. What made everything stranger was Bronx, the shelter's resident retired police dog. He'd spent 7 years with the K-9 unit before a shoulder injury ended his career. Now he lived at the shelter as a therapy dog, calm and measured around the chaos of barking kennels and scared animals. Bronx never got attached, never showed favoritism. He did his job and kept his distance. Until Marlo arrived. The moment Tegan carried that puppy past Bronx's kennel, something switched. The big Labrador stood up, ears forward, every muscle in his body tensed. Not aggressive, protective. He watched that puppy like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. When the shelter manager, Cashin Grove, tried to place Marlo in the puppy wing, she started screaming. Not barking, screaming. A sound that made everyone's skin crawl. But the second they brought her near Bronx's kennel, she went silent. Pressed herself against the chain link. Reached her tiny paw through the gaps. Cashin made a decision that went against every protocol. He opened Bronx's kennel and let Marlo inside. The puppy buried herself against Bronx's chest and finally, for the first time in 3 days, she slept. That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, Marlo refused to leave Bronx's side. If they separated them for even a feeding, she'd panic. Stop breathing right. Her heart rate would spike so high the vet worried she'd collapse. Tegan couldn't adopt just the puppy. It was both or neither, so she took them both home. But the questions haunted her. Why was Marlo so terrified? What had happened in those early weeks of her life? And how did Bronx know? How did a dog who'd never met this puppy before recognize something the humans couldn't see? The answer came on a Tuesday afternoon when Tegan's neighbor, Rowan Chun, stopped by with his new girlfriend. The moment that woman stepped through the door, Marlo started shaking again. And Bronx? He positioned himself between the woman and the puppy, his body language shifting into something Tegan had never seen before. He wasn't a retired therapy dog anymore. He was a K-9 officer, and he'd just identified a threat. Tegan's hands were still shaking when she pulled into her driveway. The adoption papers for both dogs crumpled in her passenger seat. She could hear Marlo crying from the back seat before she even turned off the engine. Not the sharp yelps of a normal puppy, but something deeper. Something that sounded too human. Bronx sat perfectly still beside the smaller dog, his head turned toward her, watching every breath she took. The shelter manager had warned Tegan this wasn't normal. Dogs bonded, sure, but this was different. This was desperation. Marlo wouldn't eat if Bronx wasn't in her line of sight. Wouldn't drink. The one time they tried to separate them for a routine checkup, the puppy's heart rate had spiked so dangerously high the vet had to stop. Just bring the older dog in, they'd said. It's not worth the stress. Tegan lifted Marlo out first, and the puppy immediately started twisting in her arms, searching for Bronx with wild eyes. The big Labrador jumped down on his own, landing with a slight limp from that old shoulder injury, and the second his paws hit the ground, Marlo went limp with relief. She pressed her small body against his leg, her entire existence focused on staying close. Inside the house, Tegan had set up separate spaces. A puppy pen with soft blankets for Marlo. A large orthopedic bed near the window for Bronx. She'd read all the training books, watched all the videos. Keep them independent, the experts said. Don't let them become codependent. But the moment she tried to place Marlo in the pen, the screaming started again. It wasn't a bark, wasn't a whine. It was pure terror, the kind of sound that made Tegan's stomach turn over. Bronx immediately moved to the pen, pressing his nose through the bars, and Marlo threw herself against the opposite side, trying to reach him. First welcoming CTA. Tegan gave up. She opened the pen and watched as Marlo practically climbed onto Bronx's back, burying her face in his neck. The older dog settled onto his bed, and the puppy curled into the space between his front legs, her breathing finally slowing down. Within seconds, she was asleep. Bronx kept his eyes open, scanning the room like he was on patrol. That night, Tegan couldn't sleep either. She kept thinking about what Cashin had told her at the shelter. Bronx had been a narcotics detection dog, one of the best in the state. He could find drugs hidden in places that would take human officers hours to search. But more than that, he could read people, could sense danger before it became obvious. So what was he sensing now? The next morning, Tegan's neighbor Rowan knocked on her door, holding a coffee in each hand and wearing his usual easy smile. He'd lived next door for 2 years, always friendly, always helpful. Today he had his new girlfriend with him, a woman named Sutton he'd been dating for about a month. Tegan opened the door, already saying hello, when Bronx moved. Not rushed, not aggressive, but deliberate. He stepped in front of Marlo, who'd been following Tegan toward the door, and physically blocked her with his body. The puppy tried to peek around him, and he shifted again, keeping himself between her and the doorway. Sutton laughed, a bright, friendly sound. "Oh wow! Protective already? That's so sweet." She stepped inside, reaching down toward Marlo. "Can I pet the puppy?" Bronx's lip curled. Not a snarl, just the slightest pull back of his upper lip, exposing teeth. Tegan had never seen him do that before. Not at the shelter. Not during the car ride home. Not once. Rowan noticed too. "Bronx, dude, chill. She's harmless." He shot Tegan an apologetic look. "Sorry, he's probably just adjusting." But Bronx didn't chill. He stayed planted, his body language completely changed. His ears were forward, his weight shifted onto his front legs, every muscle coiled. This wasn't a pet anymore. This was a working dog. And he was working. Marlo had gone completely silent behind him. Not calm. Silent. The way prey goes still when a predator is close. Sutton's smile faltered for just a second, something flickering across her face that Tegan couldn't quite read. Then it was gone, replaced by that bright cheerfulness again. "Well, maybe another time. I should get going anyway." She touched Rowan's arm. "I'll see you tonight?" After they left, Tegan sat on the floor next to Bronx. The dog had relaxed the moment the door closed, but not completely. He was still alert, still watching. Marlo had crawled out from behind him and was pressed against his side again, her small body tucked under his chin. Something was wrong. Tegan could feel it in her bones, but she couldn't figure out what. The answer started to come together 3 days later when Rowan mentioned, casually, that Sutton used to breed dogs. Yeah, she had a whole operation before she moved here. Labradors, I think? Or maybe golden retrievers. I can't remember. She sold the business last year. Tegan's blood went cold. Labradors. Marlo was some kind of golden retriever mix, but in the right light she could pass for a pale lab puppy. And Bronx was a Labrador. A working line lab who'd spent his career detecting illegal operations. She pulled out her phone and started searching. Sutton's last name was Vex. Rowan had mentioned it once. She typed it in with dog breeder and Labrador and waited for the results to load. What came up made her stomach drop. News articles from 18 months ago. An investigation into a puppy mill operation in the next county. Inhumane conditions. Dogs kept in wire cages barely bigger than their bodies. Puppies taken from their mothers too early, sold sick, some dying within days of purchase. The owner had been named but never charged. Shut down the operation and disappeared before authorities could build a case. The owner's name was Sutton Vex. Tegan's hands started shaking again. She looked at Marlo, really looked at her, and saw details she'd missed before. The way the puppy's paws were slightly splayed, like she'd spent early weeks standing on wire. The small scars on her back legs. The way she flinched at certain sounds. Metal clanging, water running through pipes. Marlo had come from a puppy mill. And Bronx, trained to detect illegal operations, had recognized Sutton immediately. Not as a threat to Tegan. As a threat to Marlo. He'd sensed something in Sutton's scent, her behavior, something that connected her to whatever hell that puppy had escaped from. That's why Marlo wouldn't leave his side. Because somehow that retired police dog had been the first safe thing she'd ever known. Tegan called the shelter immediately. Cashin answered on the second ring, and she told him everything. About Sutton. About the articles. About Bronx's reaction. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Cashin said, "Tegan, we need to call someone. Because if Marlo came from Sutton's operation, and Sutton's in town with your neighbor, she might be starting up again." The police arrived that evening. 2 officers and a detective who specialized in animal cruelty cases. They wanted to talk to Tegan about what she'd found, but more importantly, they wanted to see Bronx. Because apparently his reaction was evidence. His training, his history, his behavior around Sutton, it all mattered. Rowan was confused when the police knocked on his door. Sutton was there, visiting again, and her face went pale when she saw the officers. She tried to play it off, tried to explain that her past business had been legitimate, that the news articles were exaggerated. But then the detective asked if they could bring in a K9 unit to check her car. Just routine, he said. Nothing to worry about if she had nothing to hide. Sutton's smile disappeared completely. They found 3 puppies in her trunk, hidden under a blanket in a plastic container with holes drilled in the top. All of them were underweight, dehydrated. One wasn't moving at all. Sutton was arrested on the spot. Rowan stood in his driveway, looking like his entire world had just collapsed. The detective told Tegan they'd been investigating reports of a new puppy mill operation in the area for months. Puppies showing up at shelters and pet stores with health issues, all traced back to online sales with fake addresses. They just hadn't been able to find the source, until Bronx identified it for them. Back at Tegan's house, she sat on the floor with both dogs. Marlo was asleep between Bronx's legs again, her tiny paws twitching like she was dreaming. The older dog rested his chin on her back, his eyes half closed but still watchful, still protecting. Tegan reached out and ran her hand along Bronx's neck, feeling the old muscle and scars from his years of service. He'd saved people during his career, found drugs that kept communities safer. And now, retired and injured, he'd done it again. Not by sniffing out narcotics or chasing down suspects, but by recognizing evil when it walked through the door and refusing to let it near the most vulnerable thing in his world. The vet had called earlier with an update on the 3 puppies from Sutton's car. 2 would survive with treatment. The third, the one who hadn't been moving, had been too far gone. But because of Bronx, because of his training and his instincts and his refusal to let Marlo be alone, 2 lives had been saved. Maybe more if Sutton had been planning to expand her operation again. That night, Tegan didn't try to separate them. She brought Bronx's orthopedic bed into her bedroom and watched as Marlo settled against him, her breathing steady and calm for the first time since Tegan had found her. The puppy's small paw rested on Bronx's leg, like she needed the physical contact to believe he was real. Bronx lifted his head once, checking the room, checking Tegan, checking every corner like he always would. Then he looked down at the puppy pressed against his chest, and something in his expression softened. Not much. He was still a working dog at heart, still vigilant, but there was tenderness there too. Recognition that this small, broken thing needed him in a way nothing else ever had. Tegan pulled out her phone and took a picture. Not for social media, just for herself. Evidence that some bonds couldn't be explained, only witnessed. That sometimes healing looked like an old police dog and a traumatized puppy who refused to leave his side. Because Bronx hadn't just saved Marlo from Sutton's return. He'd saved her from ever believing she was alone again. Thank you for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and follow for more update.